everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I'm here to talk you through all of the books that I read in April. I am very pleased to report that April was a much better reading month for me than March was, so I'm hoping this trend continues into May as things start to speed up again. First, I'll run through the physical books that I read, and then I'll run through the digital books that I read, or books that are just not with me anymore. So the first book that I finished in April was The Readers of Broken Wheel Recommend by Katarina Bivald. I'm still not sure how to pronounce her last name. And this is translated from the Swedish. And this is a story about Sarah, who becomes pen pals with this woman named Amy, who lives in Iowa. They form a very tight and very deep friendship through their love of books. And Amy invites Sarah to come and visit her. So Sarah has saved up enough money. She travels all the way from Sweden to Iowa and arrives on the day of Amy's funeral. And the town lets her stay in Amy's house while she decides what she wants to do, what she's going to do. And then from there, it's her exploration of the town, her finding herself, all through her attempts to start an independent bookshop in this town. This was very sweet, very cute, exactly the kind of heartwarming read that you would expect it to be. My only problem was it does spoil a lot of the books that it mentions in here, especially Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe. I had read a lot of the other books, so I wasn't as affected by those spoilers. But yeah, Fried Green Tomatoes was never high up on my reading list, but now it's even further down based on what I now know about it. So that is one caution I have for you going into it. But apart from that, I thought this was very sweet and a very pleasant read. Next, as you will have seen in a reading blog that I posted in April, I read Wondersmith, The Calling of Morgan Crow in one day. And this is by Jessica Townsend, and it's the second book in the Nevermore series. So I can't tell you too much about what happens in this one in particular, but it is the continuation of Morgan's attempts to join the Wondrous Society and her grappling with what her knack has turned out to be, and how everyone else around her reacts to it as well. As usual, this was really gripping, really fascinating, and I just have to know more. And I feel like I hit it at just the perfect time as well, because the last book is coming out towards the end of this year. So hopefully I'm caught up by then, and I'll be able to read them all in a row. Then after that, I finished The Christie Affair by Nina de Gramont. And this has been everywhere, so you've probably heard of it. In case you haven't, though, it's the story of those 11 days when Agatha Christie went missing, and no one's entirely sure what happened to her. And it's a fictionalized account of what might have happened during that time, as told by Colonel Christie's mistress. I thought that was intriguing enough, but this book still took twists and turns that I did not expect, in terms of its structure and in terms of the plot itself. And in terms of character development, honestly. I'm still not sure how I feel about those developments, but now that I'm thinking back on them, I'm enjoying them more and more, despite the fact that they probably didn't actually happen. Not only do we get an account of those 11 days and an account of Nan's affair with Colonel Christie, but we also get an account of her childhood, her young adulthood, things that happened to her that shaped who she is now, why she is doing the things that she is doing. It was incredibly brilliant. I really liked it as almost a psychological thriller. I found it really, really interesting. So if you've been thinking about picking it up, but you're not sure whether to start it or not, definitely do it. Like I said, it probably didn't happen this way, but it's fascinating to think that it potentially could have. And then the last physical book that I finished in April was The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim. I've been hearing a lot about Elizabeth von Arnim lately, but I've never read any of her before. And this just sounded delightful. It's about 4 women who barely know each other, and for various reasons are dissatisfied with their lives in England, and so they decide to split the rent of an Italian villa for the month of April. And it's a story of them renting it, figuring out how they're going to work together, and finding themselves and what they want from the rest of their lives. I thought that storyline was awesome. I thought the writing was beautiful. I thought the way that it explored women's lives and how so much of this is still going on is really well done. I particularly enjoyed Lady Caroline's perspective on men. I feel like a lot of younger women, even today, can relate to it. The one problem I had with it is that various romances form seemingly out of nowhere. I could not understand how these people came to those conclusions so quickly. Maybe that's me being cynical, maybe that's me reading it very quickly, but I did not see them falling in love with each other the way that they did. If you have also read it, let me know down below what you thought as well. But overall, I really enjoyed it, and I'd be intrigued to read, I think it's Vera, that seems more in the thriller sort of range, so I'd be intrigued to see what her style looks like there. Another thing I wondered about her style is, this was written in the 1920s, and it felt very similar to E.M. Forster's style of writing, which then I read the preface, and E.M. Forster was tutor to her children at one point, so I'm wondering if there actually was a direct influence there, or if this was just the literary style of the time. Now we come to the digital books and books that are no longer with me. So the final book that I read in physical form was Hadassah, Queen Esther of Persia by Diana Wallace Taylor. And this was very kindly given to me by my coworker Amy. So thank you, Amy, for this. And I took it with me when my friend and I went into the Metropolitan Opera in New York City. And I finished it on the train rides there and back. This is, as the title suggests, a novelization of what Hadassah or Queen Esther's life would have been like. And I applaud that effort because I agree with the author when she said in her acknowledgments that the reason she wrote it is that we have so little information about Esther. And even within the biblical story, they will say such things as, after all these things being the Greco-Persian Wars. And so the biblical writers assume that we have a lot of knowledge about the politics of the ancient world when we don't after 2,000 plus years. So this was her attempt to rectify that and to give her story some context. And I will say it was helpful in terms of understanding slightly better and humanizing slightly more why Darius wanted to execute the Jews in the first place, what the social strata were like among the various cultures and religions in Persia at the time. But I still feel like I needed a lot more context than she gave us. For example, I still don't know why the Persians were fighting the Greeks. I'm not entirely sure when in history this was happening. And then there were also mentions of, say, Babylon and all of these other stories that I know existed at some point in history, but I didn't think they coexisted. So overall, it was good, and I applaud her efforts, but I still need a lot more, I think, to fully understand why things happened the way they did. Then I read 2 arcs from NetGalley. The first one was The Misarrangement of Sana Saeed by Noreen Mughis, I think. Apologies if that's not correct. And this is a Muslim romance novel. And it follows Sana Saeed, who is in her late 20s, early 30s, still unmarried, in a job that she feels passionately about, but other people are not treating her well, and she feels like she's just spinning her wheels and going nowhere. And she thinks, you know what? I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for an arranged marriage. None have worked out so far. She hasn't liked any of the proposed men. But this time around, she meets a man and thinks, okay, you know, I think this could work. And he feels the same way, so they decide to go forward. Meanwhile, her childhood friend and crush comes back into her life after years of disappearance when they were teenagers. However, their families are still feuding over what happened when they were teenagers. And all sorts of complications arise. It was good. It was sweet. I could, in fact, understand how the romance arises. Overall, they were pretty good about communication. Obviously, there has to be some misunderstanding in order for a romance plot to be intriguing. And so that was all very well done. However, I think what sank it a little bit for me was just the writing style. It felt very simple and almost a bit too straightforward. And in addition, there's quite a long section where she and her roommate are very, very ill. And I had to read that while I was getting over being ill myself, so it was just terrible timing. Then I also finished An Unsuitable Heiress by Jane Dunn. This is another of her Regency romance novels, and I read an arc of her first book, The Marriage Season, back in January. Jane Dunn is an incredible nonfiction writer. My mother still praises her dual biography of Elizabeth I and Mary, Queen of Scots, who were, of course, cousins. And I had enjoyed The Marriage Season, but I felt as though, as beautifully written as it was, you couldn't really get into the characters' heads. She didn't let us see their thoughts to understand why they were falling for each other. This one, I thought, pulled back on the poetic writing a little bit. There was a lot more dialogue, a lot more forward motion of the plot and characters' emotions. I realize I've jumped straight into the critique without telling you what it's about. This one is about a young woman named Karina whose mother has died. She's being raised by a cousin, and she has no idea who her father is, but she's been searching for him for a very long time, and she has several presents that he sent to her as a child as proof that he's out there somewhere and clues as to his identity. Meanwhile, the Earl of Ramsbury has lost his son in the Napoleonic Wars, and thus starts looking for his estranged, illegitimate daughter to become his heir. And things go on from there with the two of them finding each other, with the next in line from a more legitimate legal side of things, and all of the mishaps that happen from there. What I love about these, apart from the writing itself, is that it is extremely well researched. The slang and the knowledge of clothing and cuts, all of that comes through so clearly. And she mentions in her acknowledgments that one of her friends, upon reading the manuscript, suggested that she add a bit more danger to her heroine's life. And she definitely did that, but you could definitely tell that they were inserted. They didn't develop naturally to me, which does make them very surprising, but not necessarily in a good way. I don't know, maybe that's just me being picky. It was a good read, and I would encourage you to pick up both of them and see for yourself what you think. Then I started 4 audiobooks in April, and I finished 3 of them. The first one that I finished was Home Stretch by Graham Norton. I actually started this in March and then had to renew it to finish it in April. This is the story of Connor, a young man who, with a bunch of other young people, is involved in a horrific car accident in Ireland in the 1980s. And he and one other young man are the only two survivors. He admits that he was the one driving and is therefore forced out of the town to go to Liverpool, and from there he ends up in America. And so it follows him and his sister and the other townspeople in the 20 to 30 years after the accident, and how it affects all of their lives, and how all of their lives separate and come back together again. And you're also slowly unraveling the mystery of how this accident happened, what actually happened. This was really fascinating in terms of the character's psychology, in terms of seeing the development of Ireland from the 80s to the mid-2010s. And I can't really say more than that without giving away some of the twists, but as fascinating and as wonderful as it is also utterly heartbreaking. So be sure that you're in the correct emotional and mental headspace in order to read it. But if you do, I definitely encourage it because it was very well done. Plus, the audiobook is narrated by Graham Norton himself, who I've loved on television for years. And I know that he's Irish, but he has a very, to me, diluted accent. And so hearing him give voice to all of these other characters and having to put on various thicker accents was really cool, and it really helped me feel closer to the Irish side of him, as I'm sure he must have felt as well. Next, I listened to All the Queen's Men by S.J. Bennett, and this is the second book in her Queen Elizabeth Investigates series. The first one being The Windsor Knot, which I listened to in February, I think. This also has two different titles. I believe in the UK it was called The Three Dog Problem. I don't know why they changed the title. Well, a three-dog problem isn't really an expression that we use here in the States, so maybe that was it. Regardless, this is yet another mystery that starts with the Queen investigating the death of one of the maids in her house, but then also trying to figure out what happened to a painting of the Britannia that she was quite fond of. And somehow both of these mysteries link up and are part of the same problem. I really love how these mysteries characterize the Queen and Prince Philip. I think they're very true to life. They're very human. You can absolutely picture this having gone on in Windsor and in Buckingham. I love Rosie O'Shodey, her private secretary, who ends up doing a lot of the legwork for these investigations. I think she is a wonderful character. We got to see more of her family relationships in this one, which was quite fun. My only quibble was the threads of this mystery do link up, but it felt like it took a bit too long for those links to be made. And by the time they did, I had lost track of some of the plot points in between. I feel like it could have been just a little bit more neatly done, but I'm still planning on reading the third one, which I think is coming out this fall. Then my hold on Libby came through to listen to Matilda by Roald Dahl. Yes, I have made it to the ripe old age of 31, being a bookworm, and never having read Matilda. In fact, I've never really read much Roald Dahl. And I think the reason is that I was traumatized by the film versions of his books when I was a very small child, and that put me off ever wanting to read them either. However, I have fallen in love with the songs that I've heard from Matilda the musical, because Tim Minchin is a genius. And so I've been really wanting to see the Netflix adaptation. So I thought I should finally actually read it before I see the adapted material. And I did quite enjoy it. I think listening to this as a book nerd is good enough, but I think it's even better reading it as a child who was quite precocious, was quite a book nerd, and has now become a teacher, especially with that opening chapter about what teachers would like to write on report cards. And I can attest that that is absolutely true. We would love to say so many things that we cannot get away with actually saying. I wasn't expecting the, I don't want to say supernatural element, but the surprising gift that Matilda has. I wasn't expecting that. I don't know where it came from. It was cleverly used, but it just felt a bit out of place to me with the rest of the story, which was so human and so true to life. I don't know. I would have loved to see a different solution to it, but I did enjoy the solution that Roald Dahl gave it nonetheless. Then I started to listen to Carol by Patricia Highsmith, which was originally written under a pseudonym and called The Price of Salt. But I have to admit, I gave up on it yesterday because it was just so bleak and depressing. And this week has been a really rough week for me, so I gave up on that. I may return to it later, I don't know. But it was bleak and depressing and just dragging on and on. And I just needed something different right now. So I've put that to the side and I've picked up Partners in Crime, which is the second Tommy and Tuppence novel by Agatha Christie, and that's holding my attention much more. So I think I will continue with that one instead. So there you have it. Those are all of the books that I read in April. Let me know down below if you have similar thoughts to these or answers to some of the questions that I asked, or if you read a particular book that you just loved and think I might love as well. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.